All right, we are live. All right, to start out, let me just kind of recap what this series is all about. In the past few years, we've seen brokers and tech companies and other transportation providers start to incorporate more marketing into their business. That being said, it's still pretty new in the space, so we started up the logistics of marketing to kind of talk about how marketing can be used in the industry. And in each episode, we discuss a certain topic. Today's topic is going to be marketing to carriers. And we got a couple of great guests. We have Cody from ReedTMS and we have Ed from Burns Logistics. Cody, you want to kick things off with a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me, Nick. It's a great opportunity to get out here and share some knowledge. So, like Nick said, my name's Cody Thacker. I am with ReedTMS Logistics down in Tampa, Florida. We're a family-owned and operated truck brokerage and asset trucking company. I've been in the industry roughly 16 years, held numerous roles at larger brokerages, carrier sales. Now I'm a director of operations over 40 truck asset over the road fleet. So excited to be here and looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Perfect, man. No, you got some great background. I'm really looking forward to your input on this. Ed, you want to do a quick intro for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Ed Burns with Burns Logistics, part of the family business. Came into it a little bit later. I have more of a marketing background. Started an agency out of college and ran that for a while, and then when I sold it, went to my dad and said, "Hey, can we keep growing this business together?" And so got into the industry. Kind of grew up in it. You know, going to sales calls, going to shippers. Grew up around the trucking business, but got into it 2 years ago, and really excited to talk about marketing and how it fits in here.
Yeah, man. No, I'm looking forward to the marketing perspective. I'm missing my marketing guy, Zach, today. So I was hoping somebody would fill in. Luckily, we've got Ed. All right. So today's topic is marketing to carriers. And we've talked previously about marketing to customers and marketing for recruiting and a bunch of other topics, but we haven't really covered an important segment of the industry, that being carriers. And they're arguably one of the most important players out there. So, how do companies tailor their marketing to attract carriers? And I'm going to set the stage here with just a really broad question. And I'll start with Ed, I guess. Do you think that carriers are getting the same amount of attention as customers or shippers from a marketing perspective?
Cody, what do you think?
Either one of you.
I would say, yeah, 100%. It's funny, talk about kind of the evolution of capacity just in general and, how it's taken shape and evolved over the last handful of years. And, to your point, everything did used to be driven by the customer and the customer's expectations. But I think now, yes, you're taking the customer's expectations into consideration, but the most successful brokerages are also aligning with the right carriers to align to meet those customers' expectations. So identifying who those partners are in such a segregated market where 90% of the truckload carriers are under 25 trucks. So yeah, I absolutely think that carriers over the last handful of years have begun to get the traction and the attention and love that maybe we haven't seen until recently. Yeah.
They do need that love, and without, like, I preach this to brokers all the time, but like without trucks, like what are you left with? You're not going to move any freight for your shippers or your customers if you don't have the trucks to actually move that freight. Ed, what's your take on that? Do you think that carriers are getting the same amount of attention as shippers and customers?
I
And
think
you have kind of, go ahead.
no, please.
Oh, I was going to say you have a bit of a unique perspective too, because like while I talk about the broker's perspective a lot, you're more on the freight sales side and the marketing side. So I'm really looking forward to your take.
Yeah, I mean, for us, carriers are everything, right? So we don't have a brokerage model. Our goal is to go sign on carriers and represent them. They are our clients. So our business model is to give carriers all the love because we are working for them. I think the industry is changing a little bit in the way that conversations are happening. It's changing. Now there are podcasts and webinars, and I think that's still playing out to a certain degree, but technology companies are coming out all the time, it seems like, in this industry, and they all have their niche and their focus, and they're figuring out who they're marketing to. And it even seems like they'll create some technologies are created for, a brokerage or a shipper or a carrier, and then they add on other services, and then they start marketing to those other groups as well. I think carriers are being marketed to a little bit more, but I think people are still struggling to find those smaller fleets and figure out how best to market to them. So I don't think it's what it's going to be in 5 to 10 years, but I think it's very different from how it was 5 or 10 years ago.
No, it's a super interesting take on it. I agree that it's progressed a lot over the past several years. I'm curious where you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years, but we'll ease our way into that question and kind of start out with the question of what role does marketing play in terms of attracting carriers' current state? Like, Ed, what do you see as successful? What do you see the role of marketing being right now in terms of attracting carriers?
Yeah, I mean, I believe very strongly that the first step in your marketing plan and when you're coming up with what are we going to do to attract people is you have to have a great product or service, because the best kind of marketing you can possibly have is going to be organic referrals, right? They're free, they're hard, but if you can do it, then any spend you have in marketing is going to be so much more effective. And then the next piece is understanding your target demographic. Like, who are these people? What's important to them? What are their pain points? How do we take them from pain to a better place? And then where do they hang out, right? So a podcast targeted to people who don't listen to podcasts is bad marketing, right? But people do it. People do it because they're like, I want to be a podcast, a podcaster. Okay, be a podcaster, but how is this serving your business, right? So where do people hang out? That's really important. And I think like billboards are still good marketing if you're trying to talk to drivers. Why? Because they're along the road, and a driver shouldn't be looking at social media ads while he's working or she's working. So like a billboard's still good marketing. It's not bad, but it's like, how can we start taking something simple and old school like a billboard and incorporate digital tools, retargeting, geofencing? Like, there's a lot of cool tools out there that can be packaged up together with more traditional marketing methods to be successful.
No, it's interesting. I like that take on it. Cody, from your perspective, from like a carrier perspective, what role do you see marketing playing in terms of attracting carriers to businesses?
So I got a lot here. So, going to that, my email, if I shared my inbox with you, every third or fourth, you take a load, my dispatcher takes a load, it comes, the rate sheet comes in, and then the email behind it is, well, hey, we've also got these tomorrow if you want to look at this, if you want to piggyback that. It's almost passive aggressive marketing. You don't even know it's happening, but it's happening all day, every day. To piggyback off Ed's answer, I think from like a brokerage perspective too, it's also really important to recognize like what pool you're playing in. If you're a $50 million brokerage, you don't need the capacity strategies that a $10 billion brokerage is going to have. So aligning your capacity strategies and your marketing strategies with the carriers that you're trying to attract, I think is critical. So for example, if you're a $50 million brokerage, you probably have a pretty high transactional freight mix, meaning you're not taking a lot of large contracts from large shippers. You're probably limited in exposure. The carrier partners that you're looking for are probably the small to mid-tier guy that's very transactional, very opportunistic with regards to the lanes that they travel. That's a lot of posting to load boards and so on and so forth. Whereas your larger brokers, they put their freight out there, and they're drawing you to them because they've got access, and they've got access. So if you're looking for a specific OD pair, Atlanta to Indianapolis, you're probably going to one of the larger shops first because of their lane density. So it's critical to your success. I would really base my capacity strategy and my marketing strategies one and the same.
That's super interesting. So if you were You broke it down for me a little bit, but I guess maybe let's go a little deeper. Say you're that small broker, the guy just starting out under 10 million versus that more mid-range 25 to like $100 million broker, and then above. Like, how would you break down your marketing strategy for carriers based on each one of those kind of segments?
Well,
It's a complicated question. I'm just throwing it at you.
I mean, I think you have to recognize like how you can support a carrier. If you're a $10 million brokerage, you're going to have gaps in your network. You might be able to run a guy for a load or two, but then you're going to have to cut him loose to somebody else. And then you hope that you attract him back at some point with something that you have. And more often than not, it's probably money, right? That's probably what's drawing them in, because most experienced carriers are going to recognize, the way that the smaller to mid-tier brokers build their business up. You're not taking the high volume contracts. You're taking kind of what's left over, the odd stuff, the multi-drop, the lower volume that you can stretch your rate floor ceiling on. You have more profitable freight, limiting your exposure. So the carriers that follow that are going to be very transactional. They're not going to be as large. Speaking to my own day, we've got 150 units. We don't have the time to bounce load board to load board to load board, call a broker, negotiate each and individual. We need to, speed of transactions important. So those types of opportunities don't attract us as much, right? Because I think I'm bleeding maybe into a future question here, but
no, go for it. If we go off on tangents, let's do tangents.
The ease of doing business, right? So the smaller guys are typically a little bit harder to do business with. They monitor freight guards. They want to hear from the driver before they give you the shipper's address or the pickup number. They make it harder to do business with them. And we may not consider this marketing, but it is, right? How easy it is to do business with you as a broker or as a carrier, that falls into this whole topic. And, I think you need to take stock of that, depending on, the size of your broker, and just be truthful with yourself about how you're going to, market your business, how you're going to align carriers with it, how you're going to set carriers up, what your contingency plans are, your compliance, all of it.
Yeah, I think like that does kind of bleed into another question about what carriers are looking for that you should include in your marketing. And I think we can talk for a long time about this one, so let's just go ahead and jump into it. Cody, you already kind of talked about it a little bit, but let me throw it to Ed. From your experience talking with carriers, like what have you found carriers to look for? Like what's valuable to carriers?
Yeah, I think that's changed really quickly in the last couple months. What's important, right? I think there were a lot of carriers, especially small fleets, couple trucks, were super money oriented and chasing hey, I'll go wherever, $6,000 for that. Okay. For that lane. Yeah, I'll do it. I've never been there before, but I'll go. I don't know if I'm coming, how I'm getting home, but I'm doing it, and I think there was a lot of that kind of business model, which is, that's not a good way to run a business, right? To have that inconsistency, but people could do it because like money hides a lot of sins. When you have like all this cash getting thrown around to move equipment, like, okay, insurance is up and equipment's really expensive, but it doesn't matter. I'm covered, right? And now a lot of those same carriers, I would say they're young carriers, like they've been around a couple of years. They, maybe they were driving for somebody for a while, and then they're like, oh my gosh, this market's hot. I'm gonna do one of these lease programs. I'm doing it. And now a lot of these people, we're getting a lot of calls, and it's like, hey, you can connect us directly with shippers. We're ready. I can start tomorrow. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. But 6 months ago, you should have started working on this. And if you, and you should stay on this train and try to figure it out. So in the next 3 to 6 months, you get some direct relationships or some, more consistent moves. But like, I was talking to a guy yesterday, and I was asking him about his business model. What's he do? And he said he's running all over the place. He's been running all over the place. He bought a day cab. It's just sitting parked, and he wants to start doing local moves. It's like he's going to transform his entire operation like as soon as possible by, moving over to local moves, it's a different business model. And I don't think that all carriers understand the importance of running a consistent business. So
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think some of it, maybe I might be speaking past my actual knowledge here, but some of it kind of goes into having a short term versus a long term strategy for your business, right?
100%.
I mean, if you're out there just chasing money, I mean, great, but I hope you're thinking long term and saving that money so you can actually ride out the next lull in the market. But a lot of guys don't, and that becomes a
Yeah.
problem for them.
Yeah.
Cody, from your perspective, I guess along similar lines as Ed, like, are there things that kind of change with the market? And also, kind of from a more overarching perspective, is there anything that carriers consistently look for that you should be thinking about?
Wow. So, Ed's spot on. I think, when you start looking at the past couple of years with regards to who's entered the market, it's been a lot of those guys, people who have driven for other people. They're taking their first trip out on their own. They don't understand the cost of the equipment to maintain it, to run it, to do everything, the insurance piece. They saw one market, a high market, a historically high market that gives kind of a false sense of security. And if you don't have one eye on the future and you're constantly planning and evolving your strategy with the market and the ebbs and flows, then you're just kind of going with the wind, and it's not sustainable. In my particular role, we see it every day. People coming in and, hey, this is what I'm doing. It's not working. What are you all doing? So everybody, that small 2 to 3 truck operation, they're always looking to see kind of what the next guy's up to. They're always looking for like that next opportunity that's the winner, right? And there's not a magic ticket for this. I think it's really understanding your true cost to operate is critical for these guys. And if they did that, then there probably wouldn't be as much outward pressure to find that perfect piece of business, if you will, that they're all looking for.
Yeah.
That we're all looking for, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on, Cody. Because if you can run a lane consistently and profitably, you have a profitable business.
And this whole thing's been tough for me as well, because I got heavily involved on the asset side 2 years ago, right when this pandemic started, and I was experiencing the record markets that everybody else was, and I think that at times it did probably pave over some inefficiencies in the business that you didn't recognize because you didn't have to recognize, and then things start to change and you recognize, oh, and it's, you kind of have that moment of reflection where, like Ed mentioned, well, 6 months ago, maybe we should have made that commitment. And so I think, yes, spot business is great. Transactional business is fantastic. But that core, consistent, daily, weekly, understanding what you're going to take home each week, that there's really not that's the best way. There's no other way to consistently win.
So is there anything that, I guess from a broker's perspective, if having this long-term approach to business and having that consistent freight and locking in those consistent opportunities is something that's extremely important for carriers, which I think is kind of an underlying theme of what we've been talking about, how can brokers better convey that to carriers? Is there something that they can do, some messaging that they can have about their business that they can convey to carriers that makes it more clear to them? It makes it more appealing to do business with them?
I would advise more transparency. A lot of carriers might know more about the opportunity that they're trying to be sold on than the broker selling the opportunity. And I think that that's a real quick way to kind of burn your bridge with a lot of carriers, is lack of transparency through that more contractual obligation that you're speaking, that contractual obligation, not the, hey, I got you every other week, right? I've got you Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I think that transparency is just consistently lacking about, do they have the business that they're running by us or do they not? Are we doing an exercise? Are we benchmarking somebody else? there's not a lot of transparency out there. And, and I'll also say this from the brokerage perspective, I also don't think that a lot of the times we're approached by the right people at the brokerage that can confidently sell the opportunity that they're presenting to the asset.
Yeah, Cody, I think you hit on something really important there. Like, are you just shopping? Are you wasting people's time to get a rate to see if you can win the business? That is not going to build a relationship. And I think if you're going to be successful, then you have to, as a brokerage, I think you need to be asking questions of the carrier, like, what are you looking to accomplish? What are your growth goals? How can I help you with these things? Like, these are really simple questions that I think get glossed over a lot in conversations. And then do a little extra homework to understand how the freight really operates. Like, what are the facilities there? Can I park and sleep there overnight, or do I have to find somewhere else? If I have to find somewhere else, maybe, you help find that parking, a parking spot nearby. Like, I don't think that takes too much effort, because there are tools out there that make it pretty easy. But I think little things like that to help the carrier understand how the freight really does operate, what are the pros and cons, so that they can work and have success on the business, then why would they not come back to you for another opportunity? If that's how you operate, that's a good partnership.
So Ed, let me ask you this: that all makes a lot of sense to me in terms of like how I've previously preached, like having conversations with carriers and doing business in general. From a marketing perspective, is there any way to put that out into the universe so that carriers know that that's how you do business? Like sales one-pagers, different types of sales collateral, websites, like all that shit that's out there. Does any of that help convey that to carriers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if you're gonna have sales collateral or run ad campaigns that speak well to carriers, I mean, I think it's very different depending on fleet size, right? Communications to 1 and 2 truck fleets are different. So most of our communication we're doing is to 50 to 200 plus truck fleets, right? Like that mid size. So those pain points are a little bit different. But so for us, it's pretty simple. Like, hey, do you want direct customer freight? Yes or no? No? Okay, fine. Are you willing to work with a sales agent? Yes or no? No? Okay. So like, it's pretty easy for us to qualify. Yeah. Like, our messaging can be pretty easy. But one thing is, like, we put a piece of content out a few weeks ago, and it didn't like blow up or anything, but it was, what does it take to be a shipper of choice, right? And so obviously on the surface, that looks like that's going out to shippers, but who really appreciated that? The carriers. They're like, oh, that's great. You guys understand. You know what it means, right? So like, that's, how can I create that in my target market, in my demographics, that the people who I want to do business with understand that I understand them, right? So I think it's coming down to, what are the pain points and how do we do this? So if I'm a broker, I would put out a piece of content and I would talk to some people to put out a good resource on, how do I cost my business as a fleet owner? If I have 1 to 2 trucks, here's the formula. Here's an Excel spreadsheet with a formula that tells me that I can plug in, my fuel cost, my insurance, I can plug in all my costs and it spits out my cost per mile. I think that would be a great resource. It's pretty easy to do, but it takes some effort. So most people don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's go down the content rabbit hole for a little bit here, because it's something I talk about a lot. Like, I put out a lot of content for a variety of reasons, and I see brokers put out content, but to me it seems largely geared towards shippers, right? Like we can handle all of your flatbed freight. We're hazmat experts. We do this, we do that. Cody, is there anything that, from a content perspective, that you think people should put out there to appeal more to the carriers? And I'm sure it depends on fleet size and whatnot, but whatever works.
It's interesting, because I think that we're seeing a ton of it happen. I mean, isn't isn't like every interaction. There's just a constant back and forth, and it's one of those things where I just lost my train of thought, to be honest with you, Nick.
No worries,
My
man.
kid just walked in. I apologize. Can you rephrase that for me just one more time?
Yeah, so we're talking about putting out content, and at least in my experience, I see a lot of content geared towards shippers or in customers, right? Like we can haul all your flatbed freight. We're flatbed experts. We're a flatbed marketplace. We're experts at hazmat shipping or whatever.
Okay.
For me, like I don't see a ton of it geared towards carriers, but maybe I'm just kind of not the right audience for that, and I'm missing all of it. So,
Yeah,
would love your perspective on.
So I apologize for the mental lapse there, but I think the way that the carrier marketing just looks a lot different. I mean, if you look at how we market as an organization outwardly, I mean, you'll see a lot of driver appreciation. We appreciate the driver, stuff like that. But that's not exactly marketing to the driver, the individual, to get business and build that, foster that relationship. I think where you see that carrier marketing from brokerages is through your parades, through your book it now and your DAT load boards. I think you see it embedded in emails through, hey, check out our load board. You pop it up, you get a Trucker Tools interface, or you get a link to RMIS carrier packets. All of those angles are how I kind of perceive the brokerages marketing to the assets. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. When you identify what your freight mix as a brokerage is, meaning are you small, large, mid-tier, and how your customer mix and expectations reflect that, that's how you're going to outwardly market to that carrier community. Meaning like someone like us, we use Trucker Tools. So when we sign a driver up on Trucker Tools, after they deliver our load, our next batch of our available loads are popping up instantly for them to possibly instantaneously book, or via any other load board. That instant connectivity. I think that's how you're seeing the brokerages market to carriers. And then, like I said, it does vary based off the size of the fleet. So, for example, we were recently approached by one of the very largest brokers in the market. Their pitch to us is, we don't want your drivers tracking via a handheld device. We want to connect via API and get into your ELD so that you just give us your driver name and your truck number, and we'll limit communication. That's marketing as well. And so I think that, again, from my perspective, that's where it's going, as opposed to like what you're talking about with content. Mm-hmm. I don't think they produce a lot of content because you can't control who's going to see it with such a segregated carrier community. I mean, if you're posting on LinkedIn, are your 3-4 truck operations, are they on there? Do they even see it? Whereas if you're marketing to your customer and you're marketing to, let's just say, Anheuser-Busch or Miller, chances are somebody is going to see that, and they're going to find a thread for what, they're doing that for Miller Coors. Well, we've got a similar business model to Miller Coors, so maybe they can help us. Yeah. So I think it's just a completely, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's just a completely different angle.
No, I think that's a really accurate take on it. I'll ask kind of one more thing along this line of questions, though. Like, I know that there are like other channels through which to reach carriers that are popular with carriers. Like, I know there are a bunch of Facebook groups for carriers. I know that there's a lot of TikTok videos and some very popular like driver influencers on TikTok. They're pretty entertaining if you ever watch these things. But do you think that's an effective way to reach carriers at all through some of those channels?
I think it goes back to what I was saying around transparency. I think it makes you, in the back of somebody's mind, you're developing a bond through that. So if I see, which I have seen, the driver TikToks, I instantly click on the driver and I scroll through. I'm like, well, what is this guy doing? Mm-hmm. Or what is she doing? Then you see the letters on the truck, you see maybe whatever, you see the experience that they're going through. And I think that you develop that bond, or that like appreciation per se. But I don't know. I'm not smart enough to understand how to connect that further yet.
No, I mean, I think like I had a similar conversation like a week ago with Gunnar from 12 Point Logistics. And like, to me, part of like part of the value of social media and like the TikToks and the Facebook stuff is, I mean, it's a relationship business. You hear this a lot. And if you have a presence on one of those platforms, it kind of helps kick off that relationship because folks seem like they already know you, right? And like maybe there's some element of that in terms of talking to drivers and carriers as well. You know, maybe they see your TikToks or see your videos on LinkedIn or wherever they're hanging out and think to themselves, oh, they seem cool. All right. Like I've already got a bit of a relationship with them because like I've seen their videos and stuff. I don't know, Ed, what do you think about that? Am I making things up right now? I am, but
Kind of seems like it.
I mean, you see that human side. You're not a voice on the other end of an email or letters on the screen or behind a portal. I mean, it creates that human element. So, I mean, it has value, of course.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of platforms out there, right? And you're going to have some people on each. So like LinkedIn's my personal favorite platform, and it works for what we're trying to accomplish. And there are owner operators on there, right? There are 1-2 truck fleets on there. So like it does, I think, make sense if you have the bandwidth to put some time into LinkedIn and run hyper targeted ads to owner operators on LinkedIn, because that's one of the values of LinkedIn is that you can really target pretty well. And then, yeah, there are Facebook groups, and yeah, there's Twitter, and there's TikTok, and there's YouTube, and then there's, you know, the Anchor app and Spotify, and there's just so many different forums on which you can market right now. It's really incredible. And then that doesn't even take into account like XM radio, or, you know, to which I think a lot of drivers do listen. Internet radio shows, beyond that, conferences and in-person marketing events like that. And then old-fashioned, you know, things like billboards or, you know, pieces of literature at the truck stop. Like those are all forms of marketing. And I think sitting down and being strategic about, okay, what type of business works for me, right? Like, so if you have a small brokerage and you're just going to be a generalist, I think that's tough, and you're probably going to stay small. The brokerages that seem to do well right now are the ones that are niching into some sort of piece. So like, okay, we do high, wide, and heavy, and we do it really well, and then we get to know these carriers over time. Okay, that makes sense. I think it's really important, and I do think it's part of marketing, that if someone transacts business with you, you need to make them want to do it again, because it's going to be like, we're talking about marketing. And this stuff's tough. It's hard to get somebody who doesn't know you to now do business with you. So once you do it, make it so you don't have to do it again as often. Make it so that you have repeat partners. And I think that's really important for the marketing strategy. And I think when people are thinking about like, well, do I advertise on LinkedIn, or do I join a Facebook group, or they also need to think about, how can I make sure that the people who transact business with me want to do so again and again and again and again? Because that's how you win in the long run with your marketing.
Yeah, that bit about like the experience that they have working with your company kind of like ties into one of the other questions I had that I want to get into, and that's your company brand, right? How does that impact like carrier acquisition, for lack of a better way of describing that? And what steps should you take to get carriers to actually want to work with you? I mean, I see all the time these Google reviews on brokers and whatnot that are just god awful. And I mean, like that has to have an impact on whether or not carriers want to work with you. Cody, like we'll start with you here. What do you think in terms of a company's brand? How does that impact their ability to get carriers on board?
I mean, with all the forums we just spoke about, how you treat your carrier providers is really critical, because when you mistreat people, it gets out, and then it gets out, and then the next guy talks to the next guy, and it really gets away from you. You know, there was a time, you know, we had some relatively negative Google reviews, and there was some self-reflection about how we had handled some situations. We responded, and we worked really hard to work on our image from that whole thing. And, you know, that whole topic goes into just the mistrust between brokers and carriers. It's kind of underlying in the industry, you know, and you see it. So paying your bills on time to your carriers, making it easy for them to get their money, compensating. These guys are very emotional. Detention requests, layovers, making people feel like you're in it with them. It's critical. I think that, one of the big things when I was really heavily involved in brokerage, I wanted to create a consistent experience for the carrier, regardless of size or scale of their business. I wanted to attempt to create a best-in-class experience for each transaction. Going back to, what Ed was talking about a little bit ago, understanding who our shippers and receivers are. All of this goes into your branding as a brokerage outwardly to carriers. Carriers remember who gave them bad information, who cancels on them frequently, who negotiates really hard maybe when they don't have to. We take stock of all that. And so from a branding perspective, I really think it's important to understand that people are watching. People are emotional. When they have a bad experience, they share that, and how you handle it is critical to your long-term success to gravitate carriers into your capacity portfolio.
Ed, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think Cody talked about something that's really important and a lot of businesses and across the board overlook, and that's their Google business listing, right? It's free and it's awesome for SEO, and it says a lot about a business, like how well are you reviewed? Do you answer your reviews? You can do little things like, a lot of people don't do this, but you can post on there, right? So if you're a broker and you're trying to grow, that's a good place to post information on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, because people will find it. I think what's really interesting right now is, I know you're asking about company brands, but we're kind of in this age of personal brand. It's really strong. I mean, never before in human history have so many people had such an ability to talk to so many other people and really have a platform, right? This is pretty new for us as human beings. And it's really interesting. And I don't know that we figured it out, but a lot of these social media platforms, if you have the same amount of followers as yourself personally and as your business, and you post the same thing on each, your personal page or brand is going to get significantly more traction than the company brand, because most of these algorithms are written to prefer personal brands over company brands. And part of that is because of their monetization strategy, is that they want the businesses to give them money in order to have their content viewed. So it's, I think, important to also build your personal brand and do so in a way that it complements your business brand, and you can play off of one another a little bit. Because if you just go out, I mean, a Robinson, yeah, like the huge name, and those huge companies have been around for a while. They have that big brand recognition. Sometimes the reputation's good and sometimes it's not. But if you're growing and you're building and people don't really know who you are right now, I think it's really important to build that personal brand in conjunction with the business brand, and figure out ways to have them play off of each other and see what resonates.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing this a lot nowadays. I agree with the end. Like, I don't want to specifically point out certain individuals, but whether it's a broker who doesn't drop loads or who's very against non-competes, their personal and business brands are kind of commingling. I guess, Ed, what are, like, just a little bit off subject, what steps can people take to kind of help build that personal brand?
Well, I think a little self-reflection before you get started is important. What do I want to be known for? Who do I want to help? I think is a really good question that it's important to ask as you're creating content online. Like, who do I want to help and how do I want to help them? Because if you can start writing out some answers to those questions, that's your content right there. And it really helps guide what you're going to create, right? So when you're figuring out, okay, what's my messaging going to be? Well, start with the question, who do I want to help and how do I help them? And you'll have ideas. That's it.
Yeah. I think that's a good approach to it. Cody, what are your thoughts? Say you're a carrier rep at a brokerage trying to build your own personal brand to build up your book of business with carriers. Any suggestions for that person?
Oh, wow. Loads. I think you got to be accountable. Do what you say you're going to do. As a motor carrier, as a small carrier, you just want to know that the person on the other end is going to be there for you and accountable. And if you can be reachable, if you seem to know what you're talking about, you're confident, you understand your book of business, you understand the characteristics of the freight you're selling, that's going to get you traction in the carrier community. Like I said earlier, when I was talking about the way that contractual business comes into our mix, sometimes it's very refined from a large broker, from an experienced high-level carrier sales guy or customer sales guy at that organization, or sometimes it could come from a lower level, almost like an operations assistant. And you could imagine that pitch looks a little bit different with regards to the scope, the amount of information that you know and can extract from those conversations. So that really shows through the negotiation, the day-to-day conversations that are taking place as you're building your personal brand. So yes, it's important as you're building your book of business, the volume and revenue numbers that you're probably being held to by your manager. Yeah, that's super important. But I can promise you, you'll blow past all your goals if you truly understand the business that you're trying to cover. Additionally, understand maybe where your opportunities exist with that customer long-term. So as you're talking to your carriers, you're constantly uncovering information. Oh, this guy just told me he runs Columbus, Ohio to Dallas, Texas. A customer just asked me about that. Maybe that was a lane you weren't servicing or didn't have a carrier base for. And so I think the best ones, they take a lot of notes. They document capacity for future use. It's not all in your head. We're not all going to remember every conversation, so it's documenting. I always had a OneNote up or a spreadsheet. When I had a good conversation, a good interaction with someone, I took the name of the dispatcher, their email, how many trucks they have, and then I kept trying to bolt onto that. Well, okay, you're here every day. Well, where else are you? Hey, do you have another dispatcher that sits next to you? It's those interactions that we have every day with our customer. And this is kind of going back to that earlier conversation, but we should always be doing that with our carriers. And as a young carrier sales rep, that's what's going to separate you from even the experienced guys. Because I will say, all this technology that has come into play, it has almost created, I'm not going to call it a laziness, but 14 years ago, 15 years ago, when I first started booking freight, none of it was done on an app. None. It was, me picking up the phone. There was various external load boards, but you were really smiling and dialing. And the good ones, they documented their phone calls. When they had a good one with Jimmy, they recognized he had 4 trucks. He was always in Columbus. He'll go to these destinations, and they just used the heck out of him. And now you've got these book it now features and stuff like that kind of does the work for you, which is great. It is, and I'm a huge advocate for all of that. But you can't lose sight in the day-to-day with your own craft and working on improving yourself, just relying on the tech to do some of the work too, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense, actually. And I've been in the industry for a little over 10 years probably. And it was the same. It was a lot of smiling, dialing, and just hammering the phones to track down carriers. So I definitely get that. My last question here, Ed, I want to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier in terms of how marketing has progressed a lot over the past 5-10 years, comparing that to now, and it'll be different in the future. This is just a completely random question for you, but do you have any thoughts on what the marketing will look like in the next 5-10 years, how it's going to progress from here?
I mean, I think if you know it really well, then you build it and then you unicorn out. But I do think that it's a good question, Nick. I think it's.
I know it wasn't. I didn't prep you for it.
No, I wasn't ready for this one. I think it's going to be tough, but I do think that the people who are working hard really right now to create their personal brand now and understand the platforms and how they work and start building a following and are serious about creating a book of business for themselves, right? Building their own email list or a LinkedIn newsletter and that sort of thing. Those will be the people who win in 5 to 10 years the most by staying on it. I think it's going like all the platforms are pretty new right now, relatively speaking. So there's like still some opportunity, but we're kind of coming over that bend where there are now some established voices within social media and digital that, it's just not as new as it was 10 years ago. And so if these platforms are pretty well established, like, MySpace was a flash in the pan and it came and it went. And there was kind of a thought that Facebook would be similar, but now Facebook's turned into Meta and it's this monster, right? Like you're probably not knocking over Meta between Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and all their different offerings, right? So that's pretty well established. Now it's harder to break in. And I think part of it is going to change as well because it seems like there's also movement on platforms and companies like Apple. They're trying to make it harder on their platform for you to be tracked by other platforms while they continue to do a lot of tracking, right? But advertising has changed significantly in social media just because of some of those changes, right? Follow-up ads are a lot harder and more expensive now and less effective than they were just 3-4 years ago, right? So if that trend continues, then you're going to have to invest way more in your organic marketing and building that following. And I think the companies that understand this, like there's been a pretty big movement within the logistics industry. Like there's a lot of like meme creators now, right? Well, that's pretty new to logistics and that's fun and that's good. But those personal brands are rocking, right? That's probably not going to go away. So I think you got to be ahead of it and understand that building that brand for success in 5 to 10 years needs to start yesterday, but today will do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I really like the take on it. Before I jump into this next like hot word segment, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you guys would like to mention in terms of just general discussion about marketing to carriers? Ed, Cody, either one of you?
I'm kind of curious, Cody, what your take is on the market. We've had a pretty dynamic 24 or so months. And then it even seemed like, if that rail strike happened, then capacity would have tightened up suddenly, again. It seems a little softer, but I don't think it's like dire. But what's your perspective? Like, how are you feeling in the marketplace? Where do you think it's going?
No, great question. So I'm in it every day. We're seeing it in the brokerage. I hear what their margin percentage looks like. I know what our struggles look like. So, we know who's kind of winning today. But I'm not so doom and gloom. I think that it would be irresponsible to base your business decisions off all-time highs. No one in their right mind would expect freight rates to stay north of, where they were, $3 a mile for a good bit. I can remember when the national average for dry vans was $1.84 a mile. Yeah. In our fleet, we average way more than that. So for me, I think you're just starting to see the shift and the realization back from transactional freight into more contractual long-term obligations from assets. I know for a fact, we didn't want to commit all of our trucks. We wanted to keep a portion of our fleet nimble to be able to maneuver with the market conditions. But I think, to that whole point, it's recognizing when your hand might be a little weaker and you have to make those commitments. And I would just say I wouldn't count on any type of large scale shift from here on out. I think we're kind of in this mix without an event like that rail strike that didn't come to pass, or maybe a major hurricane or two. We need some sort of an event, in my opinion, to really trigger another run of kind of higher rates, how do I want to say this? Kind of a chaotic capacity. I think that when the market was at its high, it was tough to corral carriers because we all became agnostic. It didn't matter. If you're in Charlotte, you could get $4 a mile to go to PA. You could get $4 a mile to go to Missouri. You could get $4 a mile to go to Florida. And it made it really challenging to kind of wrap your hands around some of the capacity. Now you're getting back into like that normalized market to where your larger carriers are back on their power lanes, Atlanta to Dallas, Dallas to Chicago, Chicago to Atlanta. So It's a little bit easier to predict maybe where some of the capacity is going to be in the next couple of months or quarters. But, for me, I'm looking for an event to trigger something. Without it, I think that, we're going to continue to look to make fair customer commitments, leverage our trailer pools where we can, and just make good business decisions.
All right. I like that take on the market. I'm a little bit out of I'm very much out of the day-to-day right now. So I appreciate you throwing it in there.
I'll say this too. And I think it's really tricky if you're a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 truck operation who's relying solely on brokered freight right now. It's probably a pretty dangerous time because, that transactional market, I can't stress it, it's not there. It's not there. I'll give an example. I had a truck in Atlanta today. Typically, I can find Atlanta to Central Florida like a blind squirrel can find. You can find it. It's out there always. It wasn't there. It wasn't not the right fit, not the right money. I was getting offered $2 a mile. Anybody who knows the market know you cannot run into Florida out of Georgia for $2 a mile. So shameless plug here. You might look at partnering with a large to medium asset in your area that has a significant customer presence, access to trailers. It's probably not a bad play right now.
There's nothing wrong with a shameless plug. I do a lot of them.
Not even for my business, but just in general. I mean, when you're running on your own right now and your revenue's dropping and your cost is either increasing or staying the same, because we're really not getting a ton. Those are the guys that aren't getting the brakes on fuel. They're paying relatively close to the rack rate. I had a guy call me yesterday. He was getting 6 cents a gallon off on his Capital One card. For argument's sake, I was getting maybe 87 cents a gallon off at the same pump. So, those types of savings alone move the needle to align with the right asset. And it's just something to consider if you're listening to this and you're a smaller asset-based carrier running your own MC, running nothing but brokered freight. It's something to look into. I would highly recommend it.
All right. We'll get your contact info later for those owner ops that are watching the Logistics and Marketing podcast. To wind things down, let's jump into this buzzword section that we like to do. So, there are always these terms that get tossed around in the industry, and some of them kind of lose their meaning sometimes. So I'm going to throw out some of these words that are somewhat related to today's topic, maybe not, and get everyone's thoughts. So just when I give you a word, give me your 30-second to a minute version of what does this term mean? What does it mean to you? What should it mean? Whatever you want. All right. And Cody, we'll start with you here. Visibility. What does it mean? What should it mean?
For me, it's the access and the way that you share your information. It's access, maybe a broker, how they see our trucks in real time. As a broker, it's how you share your freight, your available freight to potential carrier providers. It's how you align with customers. It's how you report back to your customers. It's how you share information with your employees. I think it goes back even into that transparency word. It's kind of one and the same. I want the visibility. I want transparency. I want honest information. And with all this tech now, there's no excuse to not have it.
Makes sense. Ed, we'll throw the same word to you. Visibility. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think visibility needs to be in alignment with what you're moving, right? So if you're moving pharmaceuticals, you probably need to have, you're going to need to know the temperature in the trailer, every second of the move. You gotta have visibility to that. The customer needs to know that their very expensive load of goods is being taken care of properly, right? But I don't know that everybody needs that level of visibility all the time. And I also think we need to figure out how visibility works in a way that works for drivers. So, do they have to text in? Does that work for them? If so, great. API through the EDL. That's probably better, but that's not something, Cody, you guys can do something like that. But if I have 2 trucks, I can't do that. So, or necessarily. So that's my take. I don't,
All right. I'll give you the next one too. Asset light, Ed. What does that mean to you?
I think asset light is usually said hey, we're asset light AKA I'm really going to broker all your freight, but I've got a couple trucks. Yeah. But I think where it's used properly is somebody has a mix of asset and brokerage, and they have a good partnership with the shipper and can understand when it's okay to use their assets and when it's not. And at the end of the day, they move the freight and get it where it needs to be.
I like it. Cody, what about you? Asset light?
Yeah, that's kind of it's kind
It's a tricky one.
It's real tricky because I've dived down this path before with some really grand ideas at one point in my career on how I was going to play an asset light move, and
I think we all have.
You know, what I would say is asset light's reserved for the major players. You got to have a lot of resources. You got to have a big customer mix. You got to have a lot of access to trailers. You got to have a spot to drop those trailers off. I think that it's kind of a it's going to be an unpopular comment, but I think it's a way to negatively impact the small carrier. You know, we talked a lot about the entrance into the market over the past couple of years, and most of those guys came in with power, not a trailer, because the trailer cost was insane. And they got leveraged by a lot of asset-light programs at rates, in my opinion, make it tough to sustain business, but they didn't have a choice because they didn't have both sides of the equation. They didn't have the power and the trailer. They could only get one, and they were so eager to get in the business, they chose the power, and then they didn't really necessarily know where they could go to load it, and they ended up with some of these larger programs that, while they provide some value, are also, I don't know, questionable in my opinion.
Okay. That's an interesting take on it. I haven't heard that one before. I like it. What about, Cody, middle mile? What's middle mile?
That, to me, I'm going to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about that. That's more like container to distribution point, the front end of it. Typically, my involvement comes in right after that, right?
Yeah. I'll level with you. I don't know.
I'm going to defer a little bit to Ed on that one.
I feel like a lot of people might not know much about middle mile because I hear it used in a lot of different ways. Ed, do you have any take on it?
Yeah, I think this is one of those buzzwords that nobody knows what the hell it means, you know?
Yeah.
It
I'm in that
sounds to me like
bandwagon.
it's like something a regional fleet would take care of, you know?
Yeah.
You
hear it used
final
a lot.
mile. Final miles out there everywhere. You know, the
Right.
Amazon effect, how it got to the end user, but that first piece really.
It's a buzzword. It's nothing if not a buzzword.
It's definitely a buzzword.
Here, we'll finish it up with this one. Cody, shipper of choice. What does that mean?
Oh, that's a great one.
It's one of my favorites.
You know, it's one of those things that I think holds a lot of value, and it's really kind of tied with the market. We saw it firsthand when the market was kind of the wild, wild west. Everybody was a shipper of choice. Hey, you know what? We used to be by appointments. You know what? Come on in. We're open till 8 p.m. Oh, by the way, we got a driver lounge. Oh, by the way, we cut a couple pallets off our loads. Now they only weigh 36.5 instead of 44.5. You know, all those things that, you know, you would put a high value on as a carrier. And then when markets change, it's, well, we only have a first shift now. We stop at 2:00. If you're not checked in 90 minutes before we close, well, we're not going to load you. Oh, you can't park here. And hey, we need that bill of lading. We need scale tickets before you show up as well. So it's that's kind of where my mind goes when I hear shipper of choice.
Yeah, it's a fluid term, that's for sure. Ed, do you have any thoughts on shipper of choice?
I do. I think a real shipper of choice does not change the way they operate based on the marketplace. And further, I think a real shipper of choice does not go to bid on a regular basis, if at all.
Okay. I like that. I like that a lot.
You're starting to see a lot of that. You know, that's something that we talk a lot about internally. I mean, that RFP process, it's something I used to be in charge of, and it used to be just an animal. You know, you're just doing pricing exercise after pricing exercise. And, you know, that's a really great point. That might be one of the top points of shipper of choice. They don't go to market with their freight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they'll source new, you know, if their network changes and they need to source new carriers, they will do it. But they're not looking to screw over their partners ever.
I think that's one of my best buzzword answers we've had yet. I really like that one. All right, we're at an hour, so like I'm gonna kind of wind this down. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Especially thanks to Ed and Cody for hopping on and humoring me with this. If you like today's conversations, drop a like, share with somebody you know. If you have any additional questions we didn't cover today, let's see, Ed, Cody, you want to give your contact info? Cody, you can kick it off.
Yeah, so you can reach me at cthacker@reedtms.com.
Awesome. And Ed, what's the best way to reach out to you?
ed@burnslogistics.com.
Perfect. All right. Thanks again to everybody for joining us. Ed, Cody, thanks for hopping on too. That's it, guys.
Thank you, Nick.
Oh, you killed me now.